Welcome to the AZ-104 certification series, where today we are going to get started with the first module on Azure, which is Microsoft Entra. So before we begin this session, if you want to do the labs along with me, so you can have your own free account on Azure, which gives you $200 credit for a 1 month duration. So after 1 month, you don't have this $200 credit. It will be resumed as a pay as you go, where the money will be deducted from your credit card or debit card. But no need to worry on that part because whatever services that we spin up, we will delete the services right away. So there will be no charges that will be levied on us. Also, please do like, share, and subscribe to my YouTube channel to keep continuing on this series, and do ask your queries related to Azure or labs that you have from the session. So let's get started. So you are being trained by a Microsoft certified trainer. So we will follow the official course curriculum given by Microsoft, and we will follow all the documents which are official documents from Microsoft portal. That is Microsoft Docs. So for the labs, we'll be using Microsoft Portal, and I will show you the labs related to user ID creations, the topics related to Microsoft Entra. So in this first module, we have these topics to be covered, which is Microsoft Entra Identity, Microsoft Entra Users and Groups, Azure Resource Hierarchy, RBAC Policy, and Management Tools. So over the series of videos, we will be covering these particular topics and completing the module of identity and access management, which is driven from Azure Entra. So before we begin in this series, let's first understand what is Azure Entra and what is Microsoft Entra ID that helps us to create identities and manage them in the Azure portal. So, before we begin, let's first understand that Microsoft Entra is a family of identity and network access products, and lets organization implement a zero trust security strategy and create a trust fabric that verifies identity and validates access. So, not only identities are created, but when they try to access the Azure portal, their access permissions are validated so that we know that the authentic requests are being processed. It checks the permission whether the user has permission to complete the multi-factor authentication. But there are various factors, like sometimes people try to log in from a different location, sometimes people try to log in from an unidentified device. So those types of detection are very important and crucial in framing the security posture of the organization. Encrypts connection channels, very important to encrypt the connection channel, and monitoring for any compromise. Constant monitoring is required to understand any risky users which try to sign in within the account. So as I was telling you, what is Microsoft Entra? So Microsoft Entra is the product family, and it has multiple stages of secure end-to-end access. So not only does it cover Microsoft Entra ID, but it also covers different services like Microsoft Entra Private Access, Microsoft Entra Internet Access, governance, ID protection, verified ID, external IDs, etc. So if you want to establish a zero trust access control, for that Microsoft Entra will work. If you want to secure access for your employees, in those cases we leverage the services known as Microsoft Entra Private Access, Microsoft Entra Internet Access, Microsoft Entra ID Governance, Microsoft Entra ID Protection, Microsoft Entra Verified IDs. If you want secure access for customers or partners, we will be using external identity verification. So there are external identities that can be authenticated within the Azure portal, and secure access in any cloud through Microsoft Entra Workload ID. Entra service was known as Azure Active Directory. Now it has been renamed with Microsoft Entra ID. Okay. So as we know that all of you have created a free account on Azure, so let us revisit to the home page on the Microsoft Azure dashboard. So here we are redirecting to a service of virtual machine. The first tab which shows you about all the services and the resources that you have spinned up. Number two is where you are currently onto which service, and the redirection back to that service is given in number 2. Then we have number 3, which is more about search results that you can find out. You have Copilot driven support for any application if you want to know more, or if you want to query any particular uh, application. For example, you want to know what is the total cost over a period of time, so Copilot will help you in those support driven answers. Then we have programmatic access through PowerShell. So you have both Cloud Shell and PowerShell mode here, and you can run Bash scripts as well here. So if you spin up any services, or there are notifications related to the processing of any particular service, you will get it in the notification bar. Then we have certain settings related to appearance and multiple settings related to language, region, etc. You can do it from the settings. If you have any feedback or any help and queries, you can ask it from here. This tells you about the account through which you are logged in. Then we have different options related to the service specific that we have, and here is the overview page which shows all the parameters related to the service which were selected when you were spinning up the service, and different settings and feature option related to the service is where number 9 is shown. So this is general overview of the Azure portal to someone who is new to Azure portal. I suppose all of you have created a free account. If you face any issues, please write those queries in the chat and I will help you troubleshoot those. Now let's get started to Entra ID. Since we talked about Entra, which has multiple services combined together, Microsoft Entra is used to have identity and access management within the Azure portal. So when we talk about identity and access management, what does it mean? Identity is creation of users, groups, or external IDs, basically something which can be authenticated within the Azure portal. And when we talk about access management, it refers to the authorization level permission, which is related to roles and permissions. Okay, roles and permissions related to the user. So whenever we are configuring an access to the user, authentication and authorization plays a very important role. Now let's understand, when we talk about authentication, if a user access there, how we are going to authenticate that user? We will authenticate that user with a username and password, or maybe I have multiple factor of authentication. In those cases, I will also leverage the second level of authentication. And for authorization, we will check the permissions or the roles. So basically, we will be checking all the RBAC permission, that is role based access control, which are present with the user, or even permissions related to Entra roles at the tenant level. So both those permissions we are checking. For example, there is a user named as John and he has the username and password. But when he tries to sign in the Azure portal, he does not have much permissions to do or make changes to the service. So I elevate the permission of a John to become a user administrator or become a virtual machine administrator. So in those cases, I have elevated the permission of John. By default, John was not having any permission. So you have to attach a role to the user, a permission to the user. Only then he will be authorized to perform certain activities within the Azure portal. So that is about identity and access management. Let's now understand what are the pointers related to Microsoft Entra ID. So it helps you to configure access to applications. Who has access to which application? That you can decide. You can create identities and give them the access over that particular application. Always try to go ahead with the least privileges, but as per the roles, we will define the permissions in the Azure portal. We have single sign on to cloud based SaaS applications. So if we uh, go ahead with single sign-on capabilities, there are multiple single sign-on capabilities which are introduced in Microsoft Entra, both for on-premises environment and also for access to the SaaS applications that we have. So it helps you to manage users and groups. See, if you're not familiar with the term user and group, don't worry. We are going to create users. We are going to give permissions to those users, and we are also going to create groups in which the users will reside. Provisioning the users, enabling federation between the organization, very important. We know that federation is an inbuilt feature when it comes to the Entra ID characteristics, whereas when you go ahead with the on-premises solution, directory solution, their federation has to be taken care by a separate set of service, which is ADFS. Then you can configure MFA, multi-factor authentication for the user. You can extend on-premises Active Directory implementations to Entra ID by connecting through AD Connect, etc. So now it is called as Entra Connect. And configuring application proxy for cloud and local applications, and conditional access for users and devices, so that if that particular condition is fulfilled, only then the signal will be passed to either approve the sign in or deny the sign in. So don't worry if you don't understand at this point of time. It is very important to understand what is the role of Entra ID. As we proceed ahead, we will be familiar with all of these characteristics of Entra ID. So there are some terminologies related to Microsoft Entra, which are very important and used terminologies within Azure portal, such as identity. What is an identity? It is a representation of anything which can be authenticated. So what we want to get authenticated? We want the users to get authenticated, right? Identities to get authenticated. So here the term identity is related to to a user who has a username and password. It can also include applications or other servers that might require authentication through secrets and certificates. So for applications, the authentication method differs. Rather than username and password, we use the secret keys and certificates for them. Then the second one is account, an identity that has data associated with it. That is your user account. So John is a user account. We can say that John has an account on Azure. Then we have Microsoft Entra account, where an identity created through Microsoft Entra or other Microsoft cloud services such as Microsoft 365 are there. So identities are stored in Microsoft Entra ID. You can track all the user IDs that are created from Microsoft Entra ID and are accessible to your organizational cloud service subscriptions. This account is also called a work or school account. Then we have account administrator, someone who has rights, admin rights. So they have the admin rights to billing, ownership of the subscription. This roles enables you that you can manage all the subscription. Now, what is subscription? Subscription is nothing but payment, and uh, for now you can understand it is the billing boundary through which we pay for the different services which are part of Azure environment. Then there is another very important role of a service administrator, which is help with that particular role will help you to manage all the resources, including access over those resources. So if you want to elevate someone's permission so that they can manage the services and give permissions to others, unlike the owner role also has access over all the services and can give permissions to other, but it's a privileged role. So we generally use service administrator for that. And then the owner has all the rights over the Azure resources, including the access right, and they can give permissions to other also. So whenever a user is created, you can elevate the permission of that user to a owner using the RBAC permission, which is role based access control. So these all things, how do we give it in the Azure portal, we'll discuss about that. There are other important roles, such as Microsoft Entra Global Administrator. This is very, very important because the moment, for example, there is one student in my class known as Neha. So Neha creates an account on Azure. Okay. The moment Neha creates an account, her permission is a global administrator for that account, because she's the owner. She is the one who has created the account. Whereas Neha in her organization or company hires 20 people and she can create user IDs within the same account. But for Neha is a global administrator. So by default, the user who creates the Entra tenant is assigned a global administrator role, and you can have multiple accounts with this role, but anyone with the least role administrator can assign administrator roles to different users. Then, as we discussed, what is subscription? It is used to pay for the cloud service. For example, if I run a VM or I run a storage account or run any database resource. So, how am I going to pay for these services? Using my subscription. So, it can be either a pay as you go subscription, your free tier subscription, like I told you, you can create your own free account, $200 credit. So, if that is a free account, $200 credit, you whatever services that you are going to spin up will be charged or billed from that $200. The next very important terminology related to Azure is a tenant. Now, many people get confused with the idea of a tenant. What does a tenant means? For now, I know that Neha has created an account and she is a global administrator. But the moment Neha created an account, a tenant was also created. We call this as tenant or directory, which represents that Neha belongs to a particular organization. Now, Neha can do one thing. Neha has one organization into which she wants to run or add 5 user accounts and give them the permission, like dev test administrator, or maybe they can be a VM contributor, reader, and so on. Now, this is all about the organization one that Neha is having. Now, Neha thought that I will have another organization or I will manage another tenants as a whole. Then Neha can create a tenant number two, where she can again have different set of users, and this is a total different organization. So Neha now has two different organizations where the users are also separate, the resources that are created are separate. Okay, and these are two different organizations for Neha. So what does a tenant means? Tenant is a dedicated and trusted instance of Microsoft Entra ID, which is created when your organization signs up for cloud service subscription. And these services include Microsoft Azure, Microsoft Intune, and Microsoft 365. So what is a tenant? It is a representation of a single organization, so that you can manage your employees, your business, your applications, your resources, and so on, right? So also you can create a tenant in external configurations, where you can have different customer IDs and different access management for your consumer facing applications. So generally, if for specific application where we want to manage the application separately, we want to have greater controls, greater number of features for managing those applications, sometimes we create an external tenant for that as well. So either you can have work in a single tenant mode in a dedicated environment, or you can work in a multi-tenant mode where you have multiple tenants, where you can switch between the tenants that you want. And then we have the directory, which is the term interchangeably used with the term tenant. So each Azure tenant has a dedicated and trusted directory, which includes tenant users, groups, applications, and everything which is used to perform identity and access management. So these are some very important terminologies before you navigate to the service on Azure. These are some of the services which you must be aware of. These are some terminologies which are very commonly used when we use the service of Microsoft Entra. Now, since we have been discussing a lot on Microsoft Entra, let's first understand if Microsoft Entra is the service provided for management of permissions and users within Azure environment. What is the service that we use within the on-premises environment to manage the applications and the access and the user access? So for that, we use Active Directory Domain Services, which is an on-premise directory solution, whereas Entra is a Azure directory solution. Let's understand. So this is your on-prem and this is your Azure environment. So when we are in the on-premises environment, we have our compute, memory, network, the storage, the operating system, the virtual machine, the runtime environment, the application, and the data and the access being managed by you. So you are managing everything end to end. Whereas when we are in Azure, the underlying infrastructure, the compute, the memory, the networking, the storage, these things are managed by Azure for you. The rest of the things like the operating system, the virtual machine, the runtime environment, the application, and the data over that is managed by us, by you, depending on the type of the service that you are running. So either it is an infrastructure as a service, or it is a platform as a service, or it is a software as a service. Correct? So now when you are in on-prem, for example, in the on-prem, we have a user, John. I'm just randomly taking this name. So John has a username and password through which he signs in into the ADDS. We know that ADDS is the directed solution that we have within the on-premises. Whereas in the Azure environment for Entra, we have this user Neha who has a username and password within the Azure environment. Now, what if we are migrating from on-prem to Azure, or we are connecting the on-prem and Azure through a service known as Entra ID Connect? So in those cases, the application is migrated or moved to the Azure environment. Now, since it is in Azure, Entra has to manage the identity solution for that. So in those cases, what we do, we try to have the SSO kind of feature for John. We will try to have the single username and password, because we don't want John to have separate username and password, one for on-prem, one for Azure. So we will let John use the same username and password to sign in the Azure environment. So what is the service which helps John to sign in the on-premises environment? It is ADDS. Whereas if John wants to sign in Azure, the solution that we have is Entra for that. So now let's rule out the differences between Microsoft Entra ID and ADDS. So Microsoft Entra uses the HTTP and HTTPS based connection through REST API, whereas the on premises directory solution ADDS uses LDAP, that is Lightweight Directory Access Protocol, for queries and authentication, whereas Microsoft Entra ID relies on OAuth, OpenID, SAML, etc. These are different protocols which are used for authentication. You don't need to know end to end about this protocol, but you can search about these particular service and understand how the authentication happens in these different types of authentication methods. Active Directory uses Kerberos for authentication in Windows environment. Entra ID is with conditional access. Okay, so always remember, on premises uses Kerberos or NTLM for authentication, whereas Entra is using conditional access. Then we have federation service. I told you if there are some external authentications which needs to be provided. For that, in on premises, we, along with ADDS, we use a service known as ADFS. So Active Directory Federation Service, which is used for external authentication and single sign-on. But in Entra, that is in Azure environment, this is not required because federation is an inbuilt part of Microsoft Entra. Active Directory uses domains, organizational units, and groups for administrative delegation. This is how the entire structure on premises is designed. Whereas in Microsoft Entra, it is queried using REST API over HTTP or HTTPS, and here we give the permissions using RBAC or using privileged identity management for privileged roles. So we have to categorize if there are certain privileged roles like network administrator or security administrator, we have to be very careful with the permission that we give it to the user. So we try to leverage PIM for that. We will be studying PIM going ahead in the security discussion where we have a deep dive. So you can watch my security videos of AZ-500 where we have discussed PIM in detail and how to apply PIM within the Azure portal. So this is a quick comparison from Microsoft document. If let's navigate to this link. So this is about a comparison between Active Directory to Microsoft Entra ID. So how is it different from in the provisioning of the users, how provisioning of the external identities are different, admin management, credentials, applications, devices. So here they have ruled out in this document all the list of the differences between Active Directory to Microsoft Entra ID solution. So this was about the comparison. Now we will be going on to the next topic where we will be leveraging Microsoft Entra ID to create users and groups. So keep loving this video. So please like, share and subscribe to my video. And if you have any queries, please let us know. Thank you everyone. See you in the next video series where we will discuss about the next topics. Thank you.